Hello, everyone. Good morning. First of all, where's Gerard? He's not even here. Tell him to get inside here. First of all, I'd like to really thank Gerard and his wife, Kathy. Is Kathy here? This is one of the most sincere, best organizations in DC when it comes to government and blockchains. I've met so many really nice people here year after year. And there's people in the government, there's people who are entrepreneurs, there's startups and investors and so forth. So I really enjoy spending time in this community, okay? But my role here is actually to stir this pot, all right? I want us to think about these things. And there's something that's really interesting that's happening right now when it comes to sustainable finance and investing, sustainable and ethical investing. There's literally these two sort of warriors going at it right in front of our eyes. One is Senator Cruz. And the other one is Larry Fink of BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock. And they're having this massive sort of fight about what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm going to sort of highlight some of the differences in opinions that they have. And you're going to actually see it sort of played out, right before your eyes. But the point here is there's a lot of disagreements about what we're going to cover today, okay? So I've been teaching at Johns Hopkins in the business school for about 10 years. Prior to that, I worked on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley. I also got to work at a wonderful organization here in DC called the Carlyle Group and also the World Bank. So I got to see, finance from all different angles. And, in the early days of ESG investing, people tried to do some empirical studies. And the results were kind of mixed. It wasn't like, following ESG was that favorable or non-favorable. And the more that you sort of look at this investment strategy, it kind of depends on the period that you're looking at, okay? So we've had this really nice bull market in growth versus value, okay? And in that period, ESG did really well. Now we're moving into a different type of environment, investment environment. Interest rates are going up. We have issues with inflation. We have a war. We're recovering from the pandemic that's changing the way that we work. We have a lot of these influences that are happening to us right now. So what I want us to understand is that I don't think we have the complete answer yet. But what I want to challenge you guys to do is to think about specifically blockchains and what is it all about. And in particular, the technology, the entrepreneur, the evolution, what are some of the challenges? And I think actually this is a great time to be building startup companies in blockchains. You want to build in a winter, okay? If it's the summer and all you're doing is paying attention to your crypto prices, you can't do any work, that's not a good time. Some of the best companies were built after the boom and bust in the internet, okay? So I encourage you guys to continue to do what you're doing as entrepreneurs. It's a very difficult sort of road. So today we're going to talk about the triple bottom line. And this is a nice way to think about and frame these types of investment strategies, okay? We'll talk about equity, and this may get a little controversial, which is okay, okay? You don't have to agree with me. You're not going to hurt Professor Liew's feelings, all right? We're going to talk about healing, and then in this case, I'm talking about the earth, how we're healing the earth, all right? And then we're going to do a deep dive into assets. What are assets? And this is going to help us sort of understand that the realities of blockchain is actually people and entrepreneurs. Where's my friend? He's not here today, but he sort of summarized it really nicely yesterday, that without people, what good is a blockchain technology? It doesn't do anything. So blockchain is about people. And that's why it's important to find a really nice community that you can get some really good feedback, honest feedback, right? I mean, you don't have to agree with everything that people tell you about blockchains or their views of blockchains, but just hear them out, right? Okay. So this is the triple bottom line. John Elkton sort of coined this phrase. And it's actually very, very interesting because what this talks about is that we want to worry about three components: people, planet, and profits. Now, I grew up, unfortunately, in Norman, Oklahoma, during a time that Wall Street, the movie, was there, and all we cared about was profits, right? So I have a little picture of Gordon Gekko there, And he didn't care about what he did to the people in these corporations. He didn't really care about the environment. All he cared about was profit. It was a single bottom line. And that's how I grew up, sort of learning about business and going to school and eventually to business school. So I have my own biases, and I want to sort of, be upfront about them. But I have 2 daughters, Sophie and Catherine, and they continue to point out that it's not all about the single bottom line. They tell me about, gender equality. They talk about the environment. And we have a lot to thank with Greta. She sort of brought that front and stage for all of us. I don't know if people have families and you go sit down, at your dinner and have discussions, but my daughters bring it up all the time. What are we doing about the environment? Why are we not planting more trees? And so, by and large, we went out and bought some trees. We dug some holes, and we planted these trees in the backyard. And then my daughters were really happy about that, right? And they said, what about the planet, right? What about the planet? How else can we help? And they're like, stop buying those cars that are using gasoline. Look what's happening. So, we're an academic family, so, the next car we're going to buy, hopefully it'll be an electric car, right? Definitely when they get old enough, they're going to be driving electric cars. They're done with gas. So that generation is moving on, right? And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's a really, really interesting and a good thing that's happening here. So ESG is affecting the consumer. The next generation of consumers is not going to be like my generation of consumers, right? That's very important to understand because the preferences are changing. Okay, so let's go through people. Now, I would warn you guys, this is the most controversial part of the topics that we're going to cover today. And I'm sure everybody has their views, but I'm just sort of warning you here. We're going to talk about the overall trends, leadership and diversity, which I am super happy what President Biden is doing, specifically for the fact that I have 2 daughters, and they're growing up and they're looking at leaders across government. And what are they seeing? More female leaders, more diversity. And what does that, it gives them hope. And so as a father, I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I hope my daughters, Korean American females, can become the next Elon Musk, can sit in the White House, not as vice president, president, right? And so President Biden is giving us hope. That's really, really exciting and interesting. And for that, I tip my hat. He's doing a great job, right? Okay, next we're going to talk about representation of consumers versus the population. And this is actually very, very important for businesses. And I'm going to talk about businesses, both profit and nonprofit, so agencies too. So these are government agencies. We have more than 400 agencies around DC. And it's important sort of how we're being represented at the top levels. And that could be GS15, that could be SESs, and so forth, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about the challenges for the people. So this is the overall trend. This is Elon Musk, our friend, entrepreneur. So he says, there are not enough people. One of the biggest risks to civilization is the low birth rate and the rapidly declining birth rate. So what's happening? What's happening now? As a race, the human race globally, what's happening to us? We're not reproducing, we're not getting married, we're waiting a longer time, and eventually what's going to happen to us if we continue this trend? This is his warning. Absolutely. So is that sustainable? So a lot of the policies that were in place assume that the population will continue to grow so the younger generations could take care of the older generations. But now we're in this really interesting trend, and I think we have to be very aware of what's going on here, right? Birth rates are decreasing over time, marriage rates are decreasing over time, right? What's going to happen to us? And this is not just in the US, it's across many different countries, right? So this is actually the people trend that we should be aware of. This is the backdrop, the macro environment that's happening amongst the people. Who's going to lead us? Who is going to sit in this throne? Right? Is it going to be the older generation? Is it going to be the younger generation? Is it going to be, in terms of gender? in terms of race, right? In terms of social economic situation, who's going to lead us? And why is this so important? I think this is actually so important because the leader, and where's Gerard? Where's Gerard? He's never here when I speak anyhow, so he doesn't care. He's too busy raising money for GBA. He's the leader of the GBA, a very sincere guy, very honest guy. Everybody likes him. He tries to bring people together. And in this environment, we need more of those types of leaders, right? And that's very important. When you see a leader trying to bring people together, you've got to totally appreciate what's happening here. It's so easy for us to be polarized, right? It's hard for us to come together and disagree about certain topics. That's very important, right? That's very important. So I think Gerard does a great job leading GBA and his wife, right? They're doing it out of their hearts and they're very sincere. Okay, so let's analyze another company. This is Twitter. It's in the news. Let's look at the board of directors, because ultimately these are the top sort of people who are going to pick the CEOs and so forth. Let's analyze this board. And I'm not picking on Twitter. I'm just talking about it because it's in the news all the time, so most of you guys should sort of, know who the board of directors are. And if you belong to a publicly traded company, you should think to yourself, who should I put on my board? So by gender identity, there's 8 males, 3 females, and 0 non-binary. Sorry, I put a B there. Okay? Now, I don't know if that's correct. I'm just evaluating it from the faces. All right? By race, it looks like there's 7 white males, I guess, and then 4 not, I guess. But you can't really analyze it because they're not really in color. Now, here comes the challenge, right? What happens if someone's of a mixed race? Right? What happens if someone sort of, looks a particular way? There can be these biases associated trying to put people in these bins, right? So we have to be sensitive to that. But what's the point here? The point is that Twitter probably is a little bit more diversified at board level than many of the other publicly traded companies, okay? And so we need more representation by women on these boards, absolutely. Where are the minority women? Where's the minority representation? It's not really there, right? So I think what's important for us is to keep an eye on this and make sure that we have a lot of diversity, especially for gender, at the board level, okay? The other question I have for the Twitter board, how many of these board members use Twitter every day? How can you sit on the board, govern this company, if you don't even use the product or service? Okay? Now, I'm gonna pick on just the board members at Twitter. I'm gonna pick on later Congress. Whoa. How are you gonna regulate blockchains and technologies if you don't even know what a cryptocurrency is? You don't have a wallet. That doesn't make any sense, right? If you're going to regulate stocks and options, you might as well open up an account and trade them to see what they're like, right? So I would encourage the staff members in Congress to set up some accounts for our senior congressional folks, print off some NFTs, raise money for charity, send it off and see what it's like, right? Because that's what we're doing in the business school. In the last class, I teach the cryptos and blockchains course. The students were grouped in groups of 5. Their final projects was actually create NFTs. Mint these NFTs, raise money. Now this is where you have to be a little careful as a professor. Don't give me all that money or I'm going to get called into the dean's office. Give it to charity. So they printed their NFTs, right? They posted it up on OpenSeas. They promoted their NFTs, and they had to pick a charity in order to give that whatever funds that they were having, right? We tried to do it on Ethereum. What do you think happened? All the students complained, Professor Liew, these gas fees are too much. Somebody wants to buy my NFT for $10 and it costs $50 in order to, make this transaction go through. I said, okay, fine, let's switch to a different blockchain. Let's go to Polygon. And then guess what happened? Nobody has wrapped ETH on Polygon. Okay? So all of the groups eventually did it. They didn't raise that much, like $10 or $20. They gave it to, Ukraine DAO, and they had to make sure that the charity was legit, which is not easy, doing some due diligence to make sure it's okay. But this is all part of the skills. Now they all know how to do it, right? And it's not complicated. If MBA students can do it, absolutely everybody in Congress can do it. But I think it'll give them a better framework of how early we are in this technology and what are the frictions that exist here, right? Okay, so let's move away from publicly traded companies like Twitter, and let's look at Congress. And yes, this is a little bit dated, but I want to sort of show you about the disparities and the gaps in representation at this particular time. This is 2017, and this is some data provided by the BBC. And you can see the different representations in Congress versus the population, okay? So you can actually see, you know, who are we overrepresented by in terms of race, okay? Who are we underrepresented by, right? And these are the gaps. And I think we should pay attention to these gaps and we should talk about them, right? I think these gaps have sort of shrunk over time, which is great, but it's important to have that conversation and to be aware of where the representations are overrepresented and where they're underrepresented, okay? Next. Now for the fun part. I want everyone to participate. You don't have to, but I want you to participate, okay? We have a couple of graphs here. One is Congress, the House, and the Senate, and there's different categories. You have the silent generation, which is people who were born in 1946 to 1928. Then you have the baby boomers who were born from 1946 to 1965. How many people here are baby boomers? You guys are the rich generation. You have a lot of wealth, okay? You'll see in the next slide. How many people here are Generation X? I was born in 1969. I kind of just made it into Generation X. From 1965 to 1981, how many people here are Generation Xers? Oh, there's quite a few Generation Xers here. That's great, right? How many people here are millenniums? Wow. So GBA is represented by sort of this younger generation. How about, that's great. How about Gen Z? 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Now, who do you think invests in cryptos? Are you sure it's not the silent generation? What about the baby boomers? You guys, okay, so what's really interesting is Gen Z, millenniums, Gen Xers, right? Okay, so now when it comes to a vote in Congress and when it comes to educating congressional staff and regulators, who has to do the educations? Is it going to be the baby boomers? Is it going to be the silent generation? It's going to be you guys, so you guys have to get more and more involved. And you have to go over there and engage if we're going to have this truly educational revolution that we should have in the United States, right? Now, here's what's kind of interesting, and in the bottom, these are the percentages, millenniums, Gen Xers, baby boomers, and silent generation. The population you can sort of see across here, and you can actually see the representation in the House and the Senate, okay? So the Senate and the House are overly represented by the baby boomers, okay? Now, what I take here, and what is really interesting, is that the people in the House and the Senate, they have these staffers, these interns, these people who are sort of, you know, younger, who bring in this knowledge into sort of how these leaders are sort of formulating opinions and so forth, right? Which I think is very, very important. I'm really glad, and it makes me feel very comfortable that, you know, the youth is coming into the Congress and the ideas, right? So maybe the senator is not, you know, trading cryptocurrencies, but generally the staff folks are, so they can sort of, you know, have conversations and bring in that knowledge, which I think is very important, okay? All right, so this is the wealth by generation. Now, I mentioned that the baby boomers, which is in the middle, it's a pink part, is very large over time. This is from 1995 to 2019. And you can see the Gen Xers and the millenniums, they don't have a lot of the proportion of the wealth, okay? And I think to an extent that they're looking at cryptos as a way to create companies and not take wealth away, but create wealth for themselves, okay? And I think the millennials and the Gen Xers, and this is just my own hypothesis, they don't really want to necessarily inherit their wealth, although there's going to be $68 trillion transferred from the baby boomers to the millennials. I think they want to do it themselves, and they want to be independent. And so this mechanism, which is blockchains, is just the technology that they see that has a potential for allowing them to sort of empower themselves financially and so forth, and creating wealth, creating new ideas. So I think it's very, very powerful. And I think it's super, super interesting what's going to happen going forward, right? Okay, this is by visualcapitalist.com. Some amazing charts and graphs there, so I encourage you guys to take a look at that. All right. New leaders. Can we all cheer? All right. Judge Jackson was confirmed by the Senate on Thursday as the first black woman to serve on the Supreme Court in a milestone for the United States and a victory for President Joe Biden, who made good on a campaign promise as he seeks to infuse the federal judiciary with a broader range of backgrounds. Amen. This is great. Now, let me just preface this. Why is this great? Why is this great? Because the next generation looks to our government. They look around to see who looks like them. And they see now at the top people that look like them. And remember, these are kindergartners, first graders, second graders, right? These are not college students and so forth. They're like, hey, look at Judge Jackson. She can sit up there. I can too. Right? And that's very powerful. Now, I didn't know about this. I only know about this since I have girls and I'm watching them grow up, and I can watch them to see what they want to do. And if they see just a bunch of males from one race, they don't feel like they can do that, right? And so it's very important to have this representation, and I'm very, very happy that this is happening, right? Growing up in Oklahoma, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I naturally drew myself to Wall Street because in Wall Street, because of the movie, you just have to be really smart and really greedy, right? And I said, hey, I could do that. And it doesn't matter what race you are, right? No race has a monopoly on greed and smartness. So I ran over to Wall Street. That was like my dream. And my daughters it's so funny because I tell them about that. And they're like, oh, you got to live your dream, which is go to Wall Street. And then I say, what's your dream, honey? And of course, it's much more, humanitarian than just going to Wall Street, right? So this is a great thing. This gives us a lot of hope, and I think this adds to the whole American dream, okay? And so the more that we do stuff like this, I think we get stronger as a country, okay, for the next generation. So that's super duper inspiring. Now, we're done with the people, and we know some of the sort of issues there. Now we're going to talk about the planet. And how many people have ever seen this map? This is probably one of the most sort of famous things out of Johns Hopkins is the COVID map of the world. There's 6.2 million deaths, which is very sad. I was trying to estimate the number of deaths in the United States as best as I could as COVID was happening. We've had over like 1 million deaths in the United States, unfortunately. At my best guess, I thought we could probably get away with 600,000, maybe 200,000 deaths. But we certainly, went way beyond that. Okay? Now, this is very informative because what it says is that we all live in the world together. And what happens in Asia, in Europe, in the US, we're all affected. We live on one earth, right? And it's very important to understand that different countries have different policies in order to deal with COVID. But when you look at this map, whatever policy it was, right, people were affected by this. Okay, so this, I think, brings us, unfortunately, closer together, and we should be, we should think about, these issues, and we should think about how we live in this world together. In healthcare at Johns Hopkins, we try to find research and try to provide health across the world. And there's a lot of really smart sort of, doctors and researchers trying to work this in an optimal manner. Okay. One of the good things, well, if there's any silver lining in COVID, is that we all went home, we clamped down, we learned how to work over Zoom, right? And we're very resilient workers, people. Actually, in some industries, productivity went up, right? The planet did heal, which was surprising, right? What does that mean? The animals came back to the beaches, right? So there was some good in this, right? And we also realized that us human beings have a massive impact on this earth. We can destroy these beaches. We can litter these beaches. We can sort of, and it's us. The animals will come back if we leave them alone to these beaches. And how many people have ever swam with sea turtles in their life? Okay. If you swim with sea turtles, right, you're like, yes, let's save the sea turtles. So I encourage everyone else who didn't get to swim with sea turtles to go out there and swim with them. It's just to see what they're like. It's amazing. It's fascinating in the water. But anyhow, I'm really happy with Greta. She focused us. I never really thought too much about environmental issues until she brought it front and center. And that was probably a lot of the people in Generation X and maybe the baby boomers. So what this shows us that one voice can change the world too. So I encourage everyone to find their voices and make this a better place, right? Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of a business here. Many blockchain companies are adding more and more trees. Great, A+. One example is Cardano, right? Johns Hopkins came here, I think, last year and gave a talk, very much a humanitarian, amongst the founders of blockchain infrastructure platform. Great guy. Binance is also launching some charities for NFTs, planting trees. Great, excellent. Now there's also this crypto trees. Now Binance and Cardano are big organizations that have a lot of capital and funding. Here is a small startup. Earn cryptos by planting trees. And here is the tension, right? While it has a great mission, is there a business behind it to sustain it, to keep it alive? Because which companies is crypto trees going against? Some of the larger incumbent companies, right? These blockchain companies like Cardano and Binance, right? The key observation here is if you have a startup, you have to compete, right? This is not charity. Well, it is charity for the environment, but at the same time, you need to figure out a business model that will allow you to survive when you have a lot of competition. That's very important. Okay, so if you can't find product market fit and you can't find a business that's going to sustain in light of all the competition that you see, do you really have a business? That's what you have to think about, right? All right. Bitcoin mining, El Salvador. Where's our great job? Very interesting, very innovative. How do we do this mining using the energy from volcanoes? Fascinating, fascinating. Bitcoin mining, everyone knows is a problem, right? So now entrepreneurs come up with really interesting solutions that protect the environment. Notice what's happening here. The entrepreneurs are listening to what's happening across the world. They know that we should do more green mining. They're coming up with solutions. And I think that's awesome. That's awesome because it's only held by the creativity of the individual entrepreneurs, okay? And this is only going to continue going forward, right, for Bitcoins. We'll see if Ethereum can make the transition from proof of work to proof of stake. If it can make the transition and the gas fees can go down, why wouldn't Ethereum sort of dominate? Because it has the biggest user base. It will dominate. We'll see, but we'll see. Okay, finally, no, it's fine. Finally, we're going to talk about profits, okay? And now what we're going to talk about here is I'm going to try to map blockchain projects to just technology businesses, okay? A business has to solve a well-defined problem. The problem is going to cause so much pain that the consumers are willing to pay for the solution. If you have a business, you have to understand what problem you're solving. Now, the multiplier that you should be thinking about is I'm going to give you a solution that costs you 1, but the utility that you're going to get out of me solving this problem is worth 10 to you. That's important, right? That is very important to understand. What is the problem? What is the solution? How are you differentiated from your competition, right? Can you clearly communicate that effectively in a pitch contest when you only have 30 seconds or a minute or two? If you can't, then do you really understand the problem and the solutions that you're providing, right? Now, if you can't understand it, why would anyone invest in your company? That's important. Distill it down to the most basic things, right? And that I teach entrepreneurial finance. Students, it's hard. It's not easy to do, okay? When you try to drill down what you're doing in like 30 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever it is in an elevator pitch, it's very, very challenging. It's very hard. You have to use terms that everybody understands, and you can't get caught up in the technical details because the average person doesn't know your industry, okay? So you have to sort of distill it in a nice way. Now we're going to talk about profits, but before we get into profits, I want to talk about the balance sheet. In particular, I want to talk about intangible assets. Okay, this is super important for blockchain businesses, and I'll tell you why. And I'll also give you some hints why I think blockchain businesses are hard to evaluate. One of the things that you have to understand for blockchain businesses and projects is what value are they creating for whom? What is the value creation process for whom? Blockchain businesses are just startups exposed to all the risks of a very early stage startup. Number one, people. Do founders always get along? No, they fight each other. Yes, your founders do. We are full of emotions. It is hard to get along with some of these, most, technically proficient founders, right? We're insecure. What am I bringing to the table? How do we interact with people who have complementary skills? Maybe you bring the tech. You need somebody who's going to do the biz dev, but you'll never hang out with the biz dev person because they don't like the tech, right? Or maybe you're a biz dev person. Now you got to find someone who's going to do the tech for you, right? Think of Steve Jobs and Wozniak. Apple was great because of the blending of both of those folks, right? Technology and sort of, marketing and sales, which was Steve Jobs did an amazing job. Also the user experience, okay? Hey, sir.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. I just got to make a quick announcement. Is Jade in the room? No? No? All right.
That was a good one.
All right, thank you.
All right. That was funny. All right, so here we go. To understand the business, we have to understand intangible assets. Intangible assets are goodwill, brand recognition, okay? IP, trademarks, copyrights, research and development of the business. In a blockchain project, who's creating this stuff? The founders are creating it. What else? Who else? The community is creating it. Is the community creating it and putting it under a rock? Are they hiding it? They're open sourcing everything. So now what happens? Where's the competitive advantage? Where's your moat? Hey guys, come join my blockchain project. Okay, around the world. Let's have a lot of developers all over the world contribute to my project. Oh, by the way, it's all open source. So how do you defend that type of business? It's going to be very difficult. Go ahead. Efficiency, right? Control properties, right? What? Patents, right? In a typical business, we're locking down our IP. The Coca-Cola has a secret formula, not going to share with anyone. Same thing for Chick-fil-A. Blockchain businesses, voila, take it, fork it, be my competitor, make it better. Because I'll just fork it right back. Right? Isn't that interesting? So now you're a developer. Which one of these ecosystems do you want to play in? Well, I know Java and JavaScript, and I can learn Solidity. Okay, that's an easy one to do. Do I want to convert myself to Rust? Do I want to convert myself to other languages? That's a big lift for an individual, right? How am I going to get compensated for that, right? Because the switching costs for the developers is very easy. So now these ecosystems have to figure out a way to keep the developers in there. The open source makes it hyper competitive. okay? But remember, if you want to create a business, you got to understand the intangible assets. You have to understand the barriers to entry. You have to understand what is your moat, what is your brand, right? I love Cardano. I think it's a great platform, but I'm not going to convert myself to go learn that language as much as I love, Charles, right? I'm going to stay here, do something in Python, try to teach my daughters Java and JavaScript, maybe learn some Solidity in the process, right? Okay, so that is actually very, very interesting, and that's why it makes blockchain projects very difficult, okay? Now, I'll tell you one idea that I think a lot of startups, especially in the DC area, could do as a competitive advantage, as a barrier to entry. In DC, what do we have? A whole bunch of bureaucracy. Thank you very much. A whole bunch of bureaucracy, a lot of agencies with a lot of data. Now, if you can team up with only one of those agencies, let's take the IRS, the VA, Treasury, just pick one, and you figure out their solution for that problem, right? What is the barriers to entry? Now these blockchain companies have to come to the United States in DC, build a relationship with those agencies, deal with the bureaucracy. Is that a barrier to entry? Hell yes. That's right, it's a barrier to entry. So when you're thinking about your business, think about what's around your ecosystem. You guys are lucky to be in DC. Leverage that to the tilt, right? That's where you can have some advantage. And also construct a barrier to entry, because the barrier to entry is actually you working with an agency very closely, building that relationship, solving their problem, right? And so that's something to sort of think about. Some of you guys have educational companies, right? Go after and educate the people in these agencies, right? Upskill them. Okay. Now we're going to talk about assets and liabilities. And Ray Dalio says that somebody's asset is somebody else's liabilities. Somebody's liabilities is somebody else's assets. So when you look at a tradition, and this is just a representation, and in any way is this correct, but it's a nice way to think about it, right? The Federal Reserve, what are the assets? And what are the liabilities, right? What about Bank of America? The assets are cash, debt instruments, loans. What are the liabilities? Deposits, debt, and some equity. What about USDC? This is a stable coin backed by cash, right? Is it really that hard to regulate stable coins? If you say you're backed by US dollar cash, just go look inside, right? Yes, you are backed by US dollar cash, T-bills, cash equivalents, whatever it is. You circle pass. What's next? If you say that you're backed by US dollars, then by golly, you better be backed by US dollars, or you're misrepresenting yourselves, right? Absolutely. But what if Twitter says that we have 5% sort of bots, and it's actually 30%? Right? What about other stable coins? Look inside of them, look at the assets. Now, what I want you guys to sort of think about here for USDC is notice that for USDC, it's the liabilities, USDC. But now when you look at MakerDAO, USDC becomes an asset, okay? And the liabilities are DAI. It's over-collateralized. So one organization's liabilities, USDC, becomes another organization's assets. Does everybody see that? So if you want to know if MakerDAO is good and it's going to be around, look at their assets. Okay, USDC. What is USDC backed by? Okay, it's backed by US dollars. Okay, fine. It's good. Good to go, right? So when you look into these things, it's very important. Now we're going to talk about Terra, and I apologize for anybody who's lost money in Terra. This is an algorithmic stablecoin, right? It's actually pretty interesting. Every time there's a Korean who blows up the financial markets, I got to hide my face for a couple of days, and I'm like, oh, here we go again. Right? Here we go again. Another greedy Korean blowing up the financial markets, right? Anyhow, will this survive? I don't know. Okay, I don't know. In the United States, we are very forgiving to entrepreneurs who mess up things, right? So, you know, is the technology sound? It needs to figure out the assets. And, you know, what was Doe trying to do? He was trying to sort of get more Bitcoins in there. Did it get, you know, overhyped and too many people ran into it at the same time, at the right time? In, yes. Out, absolutely. Okay? What if Terra had a mechanism to slow down the outflows? Right? This has happened a lot in the financial markets, by the way. Everybody heads for that door at the same time. This is not something new, right? But what this sort of shows us is that we got to think about, you know, maybe slowing down the investments in, definitely slowing down the investments out. The participants who are trading in these cryptos, you know, are hypersensitive, right? And, you know, we have to be careful about these things. I think there's some gaming companies that do a much better job. They say, hey, take some of my coins, but you can't liquidate it the next day. You know, you have to sort of, you know, eventually pull them out, but it takes time for us to build this gaming company, so we need to sort of keep you guys in for a while. That's very similar to a VC and a startup. When a VC and a startup makes an investment, they don't try to yank their investment out the next day, right? How many people saw that picture of Elon Musk? He's sitting in a Tesla factory. He's about to go bankrupt because he needs this loan. It's like almost Christmas Eve or something like that. He's exhausted. He's sitting there sort of sleeping next to this wheel, right? Imagine what the investors would have done if they could yank their money out right then and there. Would he have been like a Terra Luna? Maybe, right? So, you know, what you have to think about when you start these companies is to manage the expectations of your investors, also the participants, right? There was a company called Citadel, which was a hedge fund. In 2008, they instilled a gate, which basically they said, hey, investors, you can't pull your money out, because everyone was rushing for that door. And the institutional investors were livid. They were so angry, because most of the times you wouldn't instill that gate. But actually, it protected the institutional investor, because by and large, the market recovered, and that was actually the right thing to do. Okay? So, you know, I think it challenges us to think about, you know, what is the right way to create these sort of liquidity, and how much liquidity should you have in terms of redemption. Now, if Terra's investors or whoever was holding Luna and Terra only could redeem a certain amount over time, would we have this sort of Lehman Brothers moments? Maybe, maybe not. Is this systemic like Lehman Brothers? Remember, Lehman Brothers went down, Bear Stearns went down, Morgan Stanley almost teetered on the edge, or many companies are going down. Is this like a Lehman Brothers moment? This market is pretty darn resilient, right? Yes, it's a tough part for all of us sort of crypto digital asset folks, but it doesn't seem to be like widespread, which is interesting, okay? Okay, finally, this is the J curve. When you have an idea, you have to create a prototype. I think Terra Luna was kind of creating the prototype, right? It wasn't a proven business model. And was there fraud? I don't think so. You know, you know, just evaluating from afar, you know, he did what he said he was going to do. Everybody knew the risks, right? There was some talk about, well, they're winding down the company in Korea a couple of days before this whole thing wound down, right? We've all seen real fraud in the crypto markets, right? Right? You know, when people commit that much fraud and they, you know, rug pull other people, what do? Do they try to recover their projects? What do they do when they rug pull? They disappear, quadringa, and then this guy ends up as 0x Shifu at, you know, the next DAO, what was it called? Time Wonderland? Oh, surprise, it's me again, you know. Why can't we police this industry better ourselves, right? So what happens when somebody rug pulls the community, they disappear, right? We don't know who they are. They, you know, whatever, they run away with their cryptos. So he's still there. He's trying to, you know, revive this thing, which is interesting, right? So we'll see if he can do it, but we don't know. We don't know, okay? Finally, sometimes people like to order these things and put them in concentric circles where they think the environment is the most important. In society, we live in this environment, and the economy and the profits sort of what we're doing for society, right? This is just another way to sort of think about this. I borrowed this from Thomas Bloch, his circles. Now, here's a question. Laszlo, in May 22nd, he bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. Was this a good investment?
Yes. Why did he buy it?
From an ESG perspective, was this a good investment? How many people think this was a bad investment? Raise your hand. Okay, here's a dad with 2 kids who's having a wonderful moment of buying pizzas for his kids, right? Will the kids always remember their dad who bought these pizzas for them? Absolutely. When the kids have kids, right? Hopefully we won't die out after a generation or 2. They'll get married and have kids. What are they going to show their grandkids? What are they going to show Laszlo's grandkids? Their kids. You're going to show them this picture. This is your grandfather. He took care of us. He bought pizzas for us, right? I think this is a magical moment, right? This is great. This shows a thoughtful father. At that particular time, we didn't know if Bitcoin was going to make it or not. Nobody knew. Matter of fact, there's so much risk there. People who are just, 10,000 Bitcoins, give me some pizza, okay, fine, right? Now, I want you to think about what happens here, and then I want you to think about the island of Manhattan. Do you remember when they sold Manhattan? Right? How much did they sell Manhattan for? Right? It's very, very interesting. I think this is a great moment. Forever his kids are going to remember that this is my dad who brought me into this technology, Bitcoins and blockchains, wanted to work with me, fed me some pizzas, and I'm sure he's still doing some technology stuff with his kids. I think this was a great investment. Okay? I think it was a great investment. It follows sustainability. It's just, just as a father, if I could print something on the blockchains with my daughter building blockchain stuff like as a family affair, that's awesome, right? And I think that this is, when I look at this, I'm like, very cool. The kids don't really know. That thing that his son is wearing, I think it's his son, I love Dad. Probably in New York, but I like to think it's Dad. All right? I love pizza. The other question is, did he recycle the boxes, right? Of course. Okay, so let's conclude here. So the triple bottom line provides a really nice guide for sustainable and ethical investing. People, planet, and profits, right? Of those 3 Ps, people are the most important. You guys are the most important. Build a community. Leverage the community where you're at in DC. Absolutely. Leadership is very important. Remember to try to diversify your boards, your team, right? And especially if you're like a high-ranking government official or on the board of directors of a publicly traded companies, diversify your board. Check it out. See it. Where are the gaps? Pay attention. Be sensitive to these things, right? We should continue to listen to the younger generation of voices, like Greta, like Malala, right? Very important to pay attention. If you're a staffer on the Hill, absolutely talk to your congressional folks, especially if they're in the boomer generation. Keep them abreast of the technology. Maybe they don't want to come listen to a professor talk about it. They feel more comfortable with the people like the chief of staff or the people around them. They feel more comfortable asking these questions, right? And finally, blockchain's future is going to be very bumpy. There will be more Terra Lunas. Absolutely. Without a doubt. Okay? Without a doubt. It's going to be very bumpy. But I think the intentions of the blockchain heart, which is the entrepreneurs and you guys, are in the right direction. Right? And that, if you look at the origins of Bitcoins, the people who started Bitcoins, their heart, and even Satoshi, if I sort of, guessed about what Satoshi was like just by reading the correspondence, Satoshi wanted to work with other people. There was actually a conversation where these sort of libertarians said, no, we don't want to be part of this, right? And he was like, no, we want to be part of this, all of this. We want to bring everybody along. That's what's going to be very impactful. So, continuing that tradition, I think Gerard is doing a great job. He wants to bring, GBA wants to bring everyone along. And so, what I just want to tell you guys is, from Steve Jobs, stay hungry, Stay foolish. All right, that's it.
So what I'm going to do is this. Professor Liew is going to stay here, and you can now have some questions. We have time for about 3 questions, so if you want to, you can step up to this microphone right here and ask any question that you might have about the presentation. I actually have one about your triple bottom line. Did this originate from you? I mean,
No. This is not, triple bottom line is not for me. It's has been known for a long time, right? Okay. And so there's some companies that will talk and they'll say we do triple bottom line, right? So this is not I did not invent that. I am just using it and applying it to the blockchain startup.
Okay. Is there any questions that anyone else has? Step up to the microphone so that the people who are remote can also hear you.
Yes. So your point about our representatives not having a wallet, does that not also apply to the fact that they're not doctors for healthcare and et cetera, et cetera? So what would you say is actually the solution to that basic government model that exists where they can't be experts in everything?
So this is my controversial solution to that. Every congressional member over there, congressman and senator, should create their own wallet. They should print their own NFTs and give it to a charity in their state or their region, just so they can learn how to do it. And if MBA students can do it, by golly, all those folks there who are probably super duper smart, can probably do it. Now, if they need their staff to help them, by all means. But then they'll be able to sort of give back to their community by donating, something to charity. But I think it's worth the exercise because then there's less of a conversation about what is this technology, because you can actually sit there and play around and touch it and do something with it, right? Which is you're minting your NFT, you're understanding the platforms, how to sell it, you have to market it, you have to understand, where to donate these things, and you go through the transactions, right? And I think that's important. So, how would we regulate quantum computers if we didn't interact with quantum computers? How do we regulate 5G if we've never interacted with 5G, 6G, 7G? How do we regulate that? So we have to get in there and get involved and, just roll up our sleeves and do this stuff, right? And I think that's probably one of the best ways to get all of us, America up the learning curve. And I do think that we do want to lead this technology in the world, right? I definitely think that. Does that answer your question?
Was that it?
Jens de Cree from Ireland. Just 2 points. I mean, you referred to...
Can you step a little closer?
2 points. Like Satoshi, you mentioned him himself, what he was saying. I mean, he mentioned that blockchain is one of the most complicated things to explain to people because it's quite alien, and even for blockchainers, it usually takes a few years to really immerse in the vocabulary and the precise definition of things, There's one comment, for example, when you mentioned blockchain and Cardano and so on, I think it's important to understand if you have a decentralized blockchain itself, it cannot really be a company in a corporate or in the traditional sense, because that would be causing some legal problems with SEC and so on. There's only the applications or permission blockchains that could be kind of like a startup. And the second thing is, sometimes the answers are not as easy. You mentioned ESG. I kind of looked a lot into the environmental load of Bitcoin mining. But it's not as simple as you think. I mean, you can think of mining as the quickest technology you can ramp up and down again. So if we have an industrialized country, you always need a certain minimum load of power stations and so on that jump in when the wind and the sun and so on is gone. So the answers are unfortunately sometimes not as simple as like every Bitcoin we mine is going to be bad for the environment. It really depends on the case. Some is. Others actually protect even the environment by kind of or normalizing, essentially taking out the peaks of the electricity networks.
Absolutely. So great points, by the way. I don't have all the answers. ESG investing is kind of like the definition of love. Everybody has their own definition, right? So what you think is important for ESG, maybe other people don't think that's as important, right? I actually saw this really interesting startup boot camp that my daughter, 13 years old, took. And she basically did something very similar to one of the startups that presented yesterday. And they put the ESG goals that their company was addressing, like right on the front page, so they could see, which of those sustainability goals was their startup addressing. So I think that was a great thing. Your comment about Bitcoins and aliens, right? I've heard this twice now, okay? Alien technology. So don't believe that. I think it was created by human beings, a bunch of smart human beings, including Hal Finney and some other folks, right? Will we ever figure out who Satoshi is? I hope so, but I hope that Satoshi hasn't passed away, right? That's what I think might have happened. The other question about mining, so for me to understand mining, I hired a high school student, and he set up a mining rig for me, and we had 5 GPUs humming away in my office. And at the time, we were sort of entering into the winter, and it wasn't really covering the electricity costs. So my wife was like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm mining cryptocurrencies." And she's like, "It's really loud and it's really obnoxious. Could you just shut it all down? Are you making money?" I'm like, "No. It's a research project." She said, "Shut it down." So I had to shut it down, and I give the GPUs to some professors who are doing AI research. Actually, those GPUs are really good for research. I don't know if you guys know that. But I think mining is fun. It's interesting. It's just, I don't know, something about mining makes me happy. I hope to get involved in some mining rigs, but in the right way. Green mining, not, burning fossil fuels, right? But yeah, thank you for those questions.
And for our last question.
Thanks. Good that I'm going last because I'm Korean also, and tendency is we don't let the mic go. But first of all, Professor Liew, very inspiring. Korean-American immigrant myself in this space a lot, and it's very heartwarming to hear your story as a third culture person as well. My question is around the policy conversations you mentioned, and I'd love to deep dive a little bit deeper about this afterwards. I'm in the blockchain. I was in the blockchain for supply chain space for a long time, and I'm also trying to lead the commercialization efforts in the automotive industry for my company. The big question that we're asking is, how do we self-regulate ourselves around these themes before we get regulated? Because what you mentioned is a lot of people on Capitol Hill will take advice from a couple of people, then they'll make up their own policy, and then everybody has to follow it, and they're like, this is not the right way to do it. So I'm trying to find some inspiration on how do we lead the industry who haven't been talking to each other for hundreds of years to come up with a common set of rules to say, we can make this work without the government. I'm not a Republican, by the way, but still, I think that is a very important conversation a lot of industries are facing today.
Sure. It's a great question. I mean, personally, I think you get more bang for the buck if you work together with regulators. Okay, it's harder to do. But I think if you get them to lay down the ground rails and you sort of, one of the things that we have to understand is, globally speaking, the perception of companies in the U.S. doing blockchains versus outside of the U.S., because we have these checks and balances, right? AML, KYC, people who invest in blockchain startup companies in the U.S., they say, yes, that's a real company. They may not work, but I know it's not going to rug pull me. There's a lower probability. Now, if you're inside an industry and you're working for a large company, absolutely, engage with, the regulatory bodies. And, there's a few politicians are very sort of open for technology, right? And, Senator Lee, we met last night, and Amelia, is she here? She's running for...
she's in the upstairs.
Oh, she's upstairs. Yeah, so if anyone's from Utah, you guys should vote for them, because we have to stand behind the politicians who are favorable to technology and emerging technology, right? Because that's how we're going to sort of influence folks. The other thing is, just get engaged. There's got to be a regulatory agency that oversees the industry that you're in, right? So just start meeting these people and just talking to them, right? And you don't have to convince them day one. Remember, it's all people. Like, in the past, I used to come meet somebody, and I would try to pound them over the head on how smart I am, right? Thinking that that's going to win business, right? Totally not the right strategy. The right strategy is, hi, nice to meet you. What's your name? What do you do? let's build a relationship, and then you just stick with it, right? Over and over and over again. And eventually they're like, what do you do? And you're like, hey, I work in the automobile industry, and we're using blockchains to solve certain problems. We'd love to show it to you, right? So build a relationship first, and then you can build off of those relationships. I try to tell my daughters this. There's never no, because when they hear no, they don't want to do anything, right? So I'm always like, no means not now. Just go back the next week, the next month, the next year, over and over and over again, and eventually someone's going to be like, oh my goodness, this person has been asking me for 3 years. Yes, stop asking me, right? We're all human beings. If someone keeps asking me for 3 years, what would you guys do? Like, wow, this person is really sincere. They really want to do this thing. Yes. And I think that's very important to understand, because I think we can get a yes, but we all have to kind of work together, and we have to bring in the different parties. And it's going to take some time, and we can't bash people. You don't understand blockchains. You don't understand technology. You can't regulate this stuff, right? That doesn't work, right? We're going to go farther as a country if we bring everybody together. Bring them to the ivory tower, Johns Hopkins. We can debate about everything, right? It's sort of neutral territory, and it's arguably not safe ground, right? Bring them to my class. If you disagree with somebody, bring them to my class. No problem. We'll just set up a little debate, and the students will learn from you guys sort of, arguing these positions. And you can talk about, what's the tension, do we need more education? Do we need more case studies and all this other stuff, right? And then join GBA. They have a ton of working groups, and then lead those groups.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Professor Liew.